Kola! What are you doing?
This is sick.
Stop him!
The digital clock on the mahogany nightstand glowed a sharp, unforgiving 2 a.m. In the sprawling marble-tiled master suite of Lekki Phase 1, Lagos, Kola Adame sat bolt upright. The silence of the mansion was absolute, save for the rhythmic, low-frequency hum of the enterprise-grade server rack walking away in his private home office down the hall. Kola's hand darted across the Egyptian cotton sheets, grabbing his smartphone. The screen was lit with a pulsing amber alert from Adame Global Holdings' primary data center. An unauthorized backdoor protocol had just initiated a deep-level server download. Someone was probing his corporate vault. For a man who had clawed his way to the pinnacle of Lagos real estate and government infrastructure development, control was not merely a preference, it was his oxygen. Kola slipped out of bed, his bare feet making no sound against the Persian rug. He didn't wake Amara. His wife of 7 years was sleeping peacefully, her breathing steady and soft, entirely unaware of the billion-naira empire, trembling on the edge of a precipice. In his home office, Kola hammered his biometric credentials into the master terminal. The amber alert blinked green, then vanished, replaced by a code confirmation. Data query executed from Administrative Terminal 04. Terminal 04 belonged to only one person outside of Kola himself, Tunde Okoye, his closest friend, his operational shadow, the man he trusted more than his own blood. Morning sunlight cut across the high-voltage ceilings of the Lekki mansion, but the atmosphere in the oversized kitchen remained glacial. Kola sat at the granite island, nursing a double espresso while scrolling through his market trackers. Amara moved quietly around the kitchen, her movements fluid and unhurried, in a simple linen dress that highlighted her quiet elegance. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat low bun, and her face bore the composed, impenetrable expression that had fascinated and infuriated Kola since the day they met. "The Gala is in 2 weeks, Amara," Kola said, not looking up from his screen. "I expect the guest list finalized by noon, and wear the emerald green dress. I want every investor in Lagos to see what my money buys." Amara paused, a ceramic mug in her hand. Her dark eyes met his with a chilling, perfectly measured emptiness, the exact kind of submissive mask she had perfected over years of enduring his psychological tyranny. "The guest list is already synced to your executive tablet, Kola," she replied, her voice smooth and devoid of any emotional register. "As for the dress, I'll ensure it's ready." Kola stood up, towering over her, his imposing frame vibrating with coiled tension. He reached out, his thick fingers gripping her chin, tilting her face upward with deliberate condescension. "Never forget who built the floor you stand on, Amara. Without my name, you're just another face in the Lagos traffic." Later that morning, at the gleaming corporate headquarters of Adame Global Holdings in Victoria Island, Kola sat at the head of the glass boardroom table. The skyline of Lagos stretched out behind him, through floor-to-ceiling windows, a monument to his unbridled ambition. The heavy glass door swung open, and Tunde Okoye stepped inside. Tunde looked impeccable in a tailored charcoal suit, his silver-trimmed pocket watch chain gleaming against his vest. He moved with an effortless, quiet confidence that commanded every room he entered. "Morning, Kola," Tunde said smoothly, sliding into the seat directly opposite his lifelong friend. "You look like a man who hasn't slept." "Server security breach at 2 a.m, Tunde," Kola said, his eyes narrowing as he pinned his best friend with a piercing stare. "Someone probed our primary vault using administrative credentials. Terminal 04. Tunde didn't blink. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a thick physical portfolio and slid it across the glass surface. I know. That's why I'm here. The Federal Regulatory Compliance Board is auditing our infrastructure bonds. Someone inside the Ministry of Works is leaking our routing numbers. I locked down the terminal logs before the morning shift arrived. Kola stared at Tunde, searching for a micro-expression of betrayal, but found only the familiar, unflappable composure of a trusted partner. You should have woken me. You need your rest, Kola. The anniversary gala is coming up and market confidence is fragile, Tunde replied calmly. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, he added, By the way, I spoke with Amara yesterday regarding the catering arrangements. She mentioned feeling overwhelmed. We should make sure she isn't carrying too much weight. While the two men discussed millions in the corporate heights of Victoria Island back in Lekki Phase 1, Amara moved down the carpeted hallway of the silent mansion. She stopped near the service pantry, checked the empty corridor both ways, and reached behind the heavy decorative ceramic flower canister on the top shelf. Her fingers brushed against the cold, smooth plastic surface. She withdrew a sleek, unbranded burner phone. The screen blinked awake, displaying an encrypted message from an incoming data drop. Server mirror complete. 3 gigabytes unredacted pension logs secured. Federal Compliance Officer Bello is briefed. Amara stared at the screen, her heart hammering a steady, controlled rhythm against her ribs. She was not the helpless, cowering trophy wife Kola believed he owned. For 3 years, while Kola screamed, degraded and paraded her like property, Amara had quietly built a digital fortress of forensic accounting right underneath his nose. She had partnered with Ife Williams, Kola's terrified young secretary, to mirror every illegal wire transfer and hidden land title. Her phone buzzed again with a second text, this one from an unfamiliar local number. The Audit trail from 2004 is surfacing. Be careful. He knows you're meeting Tunde. Amara frowned, her mind racing. Tunde? Did Kola suspect her meetings with Tunde? She quickly erased the cache, slipped the burner phone back into its hiding place, and straightened her dress just as the housemaid walked past the pantry doors with a basket of laundry. That evening, the formal dining room of the Lekki mansion was illuminated by the soft, warm glow of a crystal chandelier. Kola sat at the head of the long oak table, cutting into a medium rare steak with aggressive, rhythmic strokes. Amara sat to his right, while Tunde occupied the seat opposite her. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to suffocate. Kola watched them both like a hawk waiting to drop on wounded prey. Tunde tells me you've been managing the gala preparations entirely on your own. Amara, Kola said, his voice dripping with sarcastic sweetness. I hope you aren't tiring yourself out. After all, a wife's primary duty in this house is to look beautiful and keep her mouth shut when adults are talking business. A sharp electric shock of eye contact passed between Amara and Tunde across the table. A silent, intense communication that excluded Kola entirely. Kola slammed his fork down onto the porcelain plate. The sharp clang echoed loudly through the vaulted dining hall. What did you just say, Tunde? Kola snarled, standing up so fast his chair screeched against the marble floor. Tunde looked up slowly, a faint chilling smile playing on his lips. I said, Kola, that foundations built on sand usually collapse when the tide comes in. Don't you agree? Kola's chest heaved. He looked from Tunde to Amara, whose face remained a mask of undisturbed eyes. The private investigator's dossier from earlier that week flashed through Kola's mind. Photographs of his wife and his best friend meeting in secluded parking lots, whispering over dark corners. Get out, Kola whispered, his voice shaking with murderous rage. Both of you, get out of my house right now. The heavy oak front door clicked shut, sealing the vast mansion in an echoing, suffocating vacuum. Kola stood alone in the center of the foyer, his breath coming in ragged, furious gasps. The anger that had sustained him during the dinner confrontation began to curdle, replaced by a cold, insidious spike of adrenaline. He marched back into his home office, locking the door behind him. The glowing server racks hummed mockingly in the corner. He sat at his terminal, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with frantic speed. If Tunde had access to Terminal 04, what else had he touched? What files had been copied? As the decryption bars filled the dual monitors, Kola's eyes widened in horror. It wasn't just infrastructure routing numbers. Someone had siphoned 3 years of internal audit trails, land allocation certificates, and offshore shell company registries straight to an external federal IP address. Kola grabbed his desk phone, jabbing a speed dial button with trembling rage. It rang 4 times before a breathless, trembling voice answered on the other end. "Mr. Adeyemi? Sir? Is everything all right?" "Ifa," Kola barked, his voice dripping with venomous authority. "Listen to me very carefully. Get dressed. Meet me at the Victoria Island office in 40 minutes. Do not talk to anyone. Do not check your phone. And bring the physical master archive keys from the ground floor vault. If you are a minute late, you won't have a job tomorrow. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Yes, Mr. Adeyemi. I'm on my way," the young secretary stammered before the line went dead. An hour later, the towering glass facade of Adeyemi Global Holdings stood cold and silent against the pre-dawn Lagos sky. If Williams stood outside the heavy glass entrance doors, shifting nervously from foot to foot. At 24, If was half Kola's age, with a slender build, wide, nervous eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a cheap polyester suit that looked perpetually wrinkled. He clutched a heavy leather briefcase against his chest like a shield. The electronic lock clicked with a sharp buzz, and the glass door swung open. Kola stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the stark fluorescent lights of the empty lobby. "You're late, Ife," Kola said coldly, stepping aside to let the young man stumble past. "Traffic on the Lekki-Ikoyi link bridge was locked down, sir. I came as fast as I could," If panted, his voice cracking slightly as he followed Kola down into the sub-level archive room. The archive room smelled of old paper, dust, and chilled air. Rows of grey metal shelving stretched into the gloom. Kola turned around abruptly, pinning Ife against the steel filing cabinet with a single heavy forearm slammed against the metal right beside Ife's head. "Talk to me about the 2004 land acquisition files, Ifa," Kola whispered, his voice dangerously soft. "Someone accessed the legacy folders yesterday? Folders that only you and I have the physical master keys to open. Did you touch them?" Ife's breath itched. His heart slammed against his ribs like a trapped bird. In his breast pocket, tucked deep beneath his cheap shirt lining, a small encrypted USB drive burned against his skin, containing the exact mirror files he had shared with Amara 48 hours ago. "I swear to God, Mr. Adeyemi, I haven't touched those folders. I only handle the daily payroll and vendor invoices," Eve cried out, his voice pitching high with genuine panic. Kola studied him for 5 agonizing seconds, his gaze sharp enough to cut glass. Slowly, Kola lowered his arm, stepping back. He didn't believe Ife entirely, but he knew Ife lacked the spine to orchestrate a corporate heist alone. "If I find out you lied to me, Ife, you won't just lose your job, you'll disappear," Kola said flatly, turning his back. "Open the physical vault. I need the 2004 Okoye Industries partnership ledger." While Kola searched for ghosts in his corporate archives, Across town in a secluded high-end garden cafe in Ikoyi, Amara sat under a canvas umbrella surrounded by lush bougainvillea. She wore a tailored cream-colored blazer and oversized dark sunglasses, sipping black coffee with unhurried grace. A shadow fell across a table. Tunde Okoye pulled out the opposite chair and sat down without a word, signaling the waiter for espresso. Kola went berserk last night, Tunde murmured, keeping his voice low as he stirred his coffee. He cleared out his office safe at 3 in the morning. He knows the digital perimeter was breached. How is Ife holding up? Ife is terrified, but holding the line, Amara replied smoothly, her lips curving into a faint, confident smile. The 2004 Okoye Industries ledger is already in federal hands. Once the compliance board links Kola's original asset seizure from 20 years ago to his current real estate holdings, his entire empire collapses like a house of cards. Tunde looked at her, a complex mix of respect and sorrow crossing his sharp features. 20 years ago, Kola stole my father's construction firm using forged bankruptcy papers and engineered a hostile takeover that broke my family. I spent 2 decades playing the loyal best friend, waiting for the exact moment his arrogance blinded him. And he brought me into his house, thinking I was just a trophy to parade at galas, Amara added softly, her dark eyes flashing with cold fire. He taught me everything about his business empire. Thinking I was too submissive to notice he was laundering state infrastructure funds through shell companies, he built his own executioner. With exactly 4 days remaining until Adeyemi Global Holdings' 10th anniversary charity gala, Lagos society was buzzing with anticipation. Invitations had gone out to cabinet ministers, royal traditional rulers, and billionaire real estate moguls. Everyone wanted a seat at Kola Adeyemi's table. Kola, consumed by paranoia and desperate to project an image of absolute invincibility, threw himself into preparations, demanding daily status reports on security, guest lists, and media coverage. He had not spoken to Amara since banishing her from the mansion, assuming she was cowering in a rented apartment somewhere on the mainland. He had no idea that Amara was personally overseeing the seating arrangements for the VIP section from her private laptop, directly coordinating with the hotel's head of security. By the 3rd night before the gala, the walls were closing in on Kola. The Federal Regulatory Board had suddenly frozen 3 of his primary project accounts, pending an unannounced forensic audit. His phone was ringing constantly with nervous calls from bank directors and political allies. Kola sat at his mahogany desk, staring at the contact screen on his smartphone. Amara. He needed her at the gala. Lagos elite expected the power couple. A sudden separation on the eve of the anniversary would spark market panic and invite unwanted media scrutiny. His thumb hovered over the call button. His narcissistic pride warred with his desperate need for public control. With a grunt of disgust, he threw the phone across the desk. He would force her to return on the night of the event. The night before the grand anniversary gala, Lagos slept under a heavy, humid blanket of tropical clouds. In the silent, oversized mansion in Lekki Phase 1, Kola Adeyemi poured himself a glass of whiskey, drinking alone in the dark, whispering threats to an empty room. He believed he had outmaneuvered the Audit, that his wealth was too vast to touch, and that tomorrow he would humiliate Amara and Tunde before the entire nation. Across town, in a high-rise penthouse overlooking the glittering lights of Victoria Island, Amara stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass window, dressed in a silk robe, watching the distant skyline. Tunde sat at a mahogany table behind her, closing a thick black binder labeled Federal Case File, Adeyemi Global. Everything was in place. Tomorrow, the mask would finally come off. The red carpet outside the Echo Hotel Grand Ballroom blazed with camera flashes, television crews, and the low hum of Lagos high society. Chauffeurs in crisp white gloves opened door after door for cabinet ministers, petroleum magnates, and celebrity influencers dressed in blinding traditional attire and bespoke Italian suits. At precisely 8 o'clock, a sleek black armored Maybach glided to a halt. Kola Adame stepped out into the glare of the lights, adjusting the curves of his pristine midnight blue tuxedo with calculated swagger. He flashed his trademark charismatic predatory smile for the cameras, standing tall and projecting the image of an untouchable titan. A leading society entertainment reporter shoved a microphone forward. Mr. Adeyemi, Senator Akpabio is already inside, but society is buzzing. Where is the queen of the empire tonight? Where is Mrs. Amara Adeyemi? Kola's smile tightened for a fraction of a second, but his voice remained smooth as silk. Amara is attending to last-minute philanthropic duties for our foundation tonight, but she will join us shortly. The Adeyemi legacy is built on endurance, not optics. With a dismissive wave, he strode past the velvet ropes into the roaring ballroom. Inside the sprawling, crystal-chandeliered ballroom, the atmosphere was electric with champagne and opulence. String quartets played softly near the cascading indoor fountains, while guests murmured in hushed groups around gilded tables. Tunde Okoye stood near the edge of the VIP balcony, holding a sparkling glass of mineral water. He wore a flawless charcoal dinner jacket, his posture relaxed and open. Several senior bank directors gravitated toward him immediately, whispering urgent questions. Tunde, your Kola's closest partner, a portly real estate tycoon murmured, leaning in close. Word on the street is the Federal Regulatory Board froze 3 of Kola's land accounts this morning. And where is Amara? People are saying the marriage is fracturing. Tunde took a slow sip of water, his expression an absolute mask of polite, sympathetic regret. Kola is under a great deal of pressure right now, gentlemen. All empires face storms, but let us enjoy the celebration tonight. Everything will come to light in due course. At the stroke of 9, the house lights dimmed, and the spotlight caught through the ballroom haze, illuminating the grand raised stage. Kola Adeyemi stepped up to the mahogany podium, his chest swelling with pride as thunderous applause erupted from hundreds of elite guests. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, royal fathers, and partners in progress, Kola began, his deep resonant voice echoing through the acoustic sound system. 10 years ago, I founded Adeyemi Global Holdings on a simple promise: absolute excellence, unshakable integrity, and an unyielding commitment to the future of Nigeria. Tonight, despite the whispers of cynics and the temporary hurdles of bureaucracy, our foundation stands stronger than ever. As the applause crested, the heavy oak doors at the back of the grand ballroom swung open with a sharp echoing thud. 3 men in dark federal compliance suits, flanked by uniformed security officers, strode purposefully down the central aisle. Walking quietly directly behind the lead federal investigator was Ife Williams, dressed in a new, neatly pressed black suit that still couldn't hide his nervous frame. Ife clutched a heavy tamper-evident federal evidence case against his side, his heart hammered against his ribs like a sledgehammer, but for the first time in his life, his hands did not shake. He had spent the afternoon sitting across from the Federal Director of Financial Crimes, laying out every single forged signature, every laundered shell company account, and every threat Kola had ever made. As the murmurs of the crowd began to ripple outward from the center aisle, turning heads away from the stage, Kola stopped mid-sentence. His eyes narrowed in sudden, violent disbelief as he spotted his own terrified secretary marching down the aisle with federal authorities. "Mr. Kola Adame," the lead investigator announced, his voice carrying clearly across the silent, stunned ballroom through the podium microphone. "By order of the Federal Financial Crimes Commission and the Special Presidential Panel on Corporate Fraud, you are hereby served with a warrant for immediate arrest, asset forfeiture, and criminal prosecution." Kola slammed his fist down onto the wooden podium, shattering a water glass into glittering shards. "This is an outrage, a political setup. Remove these men from my hotel immediately," he roared, his voice cracking with volcanic fury as veins bulged across his forehead. "There is no setup, Kola," a calm, crystal-clear voice rang out from the side entrance. The crowd parted as the heavy oak doors opened fully. Back in the grand ballroom, before Kola could snatch the envelope from Tunde's hand, the heavy glass doors burst open once more. A squad of armed federal financial crimes officers in sharp tactical suits marched in with military precision, led by a senior commissioner holding a crisp legal warrant. The room erupted into gasps of shock and flashing smartphone cameras as the officers marched straight down the center aisle toward the dais. Kola whipped around, his face turning an ash-gray color. "What is the meaning of this? Do you know who I am?" "I am Kola Adame." The senior commissioner stopped at the base of the dais, holding up the official document. "Kola Wole Adame, by order of the Federal High Court and the 2004 Asset Recovery Directorate, you are hereby placed under arrest for corporate fraud, historical asset theft, and money laundering. All assets of Adame Global Holdings are frozen effective immediately." As the cold steel cuffs clicked around his wrists, Kola let out a guttural gasp of disbelief. He wrenched his head around, looking frantically toward his wife for defense, for shelter, for any sign of loyalty. Amara did not shrink away. Instead, she smoothed the emerald green silk of her gown, stepped forward past the arresting officers, and walked directly over to stand side by side with Tunde Okoye. Kola stared at her, his eyes wide with unadulterated horror, as the horrifying truth crashed over him like a tidal wave. The burner phones, the late-night data queries, the cold silence. It wasn't Tunde working alone. It was Amara. She had engineered every single piece of it. "You," Kola whispered, his voice cracking into a broken wheeze. "Amara, you did this?" Amara looked him dead in the eye, her expression a masterpiece of cold, absolute sovereignty. "You taught me well, Kola. You built the floor I stood on, but you forgot that I watched you lay every rotten brick." Two federal officers gripped Kola firmly by the arms, dragging him backward down the red carpet toward the waiting black detention van. The glittering elite of Lagos parted like the Red Sea, staring in stunned, terrified silence as the titan of real estate was hauled away in cheap steel handcuffs. Outside the glass doors, the Lagos press corps descended upon him like a pack of wolves. Flashbulbs exploded continuously in his face, blinding him, while shouting journalists shoved microphones toward his mouth. "Mr. Adame, is Adame Global bankrupt? Is it true? You stole Okoye Industries in 2004? Kola snarled like a caged animal, lunging forward toward a camera, before the officers shoved him roughly into the back of the van and slammed the heavy metal door shut. High above the chaos of the red carpet, inside a quiet private balcony, sweet overlooking the glittering lights of Victoria Island, the night air was cool and peaceful. Amara stood at the glass railing, her hands resting lightly on the cold metal. The emerald green silk gown swayed gently in the evening breeze. The door opened softly and Tunde stepped out, holding 2 crystal glasses of sparkling water. He handed one to her without a word. The federal receivership has secured all domestic and offshore holdings, Tunde said softly, leaning against the railing beside her. Kola is in the holding facility. The empire of sand has collapsed. Amara took a slow sip of water, looking out over the sprawling Lagos skyline as the distant sirens faded into the night. For the first time in 7 years, the suffocating weight on her chest was entirely gone. The balcony door slid open once more, and Ife Williams stepped out, clutching his ruggedized laptop bag under his arm. He looked less like a terrified secretary now, and more like a man who had earned his place in history. All final server mirrors have been successfully transferred to the Federal Archives, Ife announced, a tentative proud smile breaking across his face. The prosecutor has everything. It's airtight. Amara turned, her face softening into a warm, genuine smile for the young man who had risked everything alongside her. She raised her glass. To truth, Amara said softly. And to justice, Tunde added, clinking his glass against hers. Ife smiled broadly, stepping up to join them at the railing as the three of them looked out over the city they had reclaimed. The fluorescent lights of the federal holding facility hummed with a sterile, unforgiving buzz. Stripped of his bespoke midnight blue tuxedo jacket and wearing a rumpled white dress shirt with loosened cuffs, Kola Adame paced the length of the metal interrogation room like a caged panther. His clean-shaved head was sleek with sweat, and his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night of rage. Across the scarred laminate table sat the lead federal investigator, flipping methodically through a thick binder of financial records. "You're wasting your time," Kola snapped, slamming his palms onto the table with a loud crack. "By noon, my legal team from London will have injunctions filed against every single one of you. You cannot touch Adeyemi Global Holdings. It is too big." The investigator did not flinch. He looked up slowly, sliding a single audited document across the table. "Mr. Adeyemi, your legal team cannot file injunctions for a company that no longer exists under your control. At 6 a.m., the Federal High Court granted a total receivership order. Every shell company, every offshore account in the Caymans, and every real estate portfolio in Lekki and Victoria Island has been seized under the 2004 Asset Recovery Act." Kola stared down at the paper, his breath catching in his throat. In a quiet sunlit office upstairs, 24-year-old Ife Williams sat across from the Director of Financial Crimes. Ife wore his simple grey suit, his wire-rimmed glasses resting slightly crooked on his nose. His hands were steady as he held a silver fountain pen above a thick stack of official state protection papers. "By signing this, Ife, you are granted full state immunity from corporate prosecution in exchange for your complete testimony and turning over all remaining physical master archives," the director said softly, sliding the document closer. Ife looked down at the signature line. He thought of the late nights in the sub-level archive room, the terror of Kola's shadow, and the quiet courage Amara had shown him when no one else would. He pressed the pen to paper and signed his name with firm, deliberate strokes. "It's done, sir," Ife whispered, exhaling a breath he felt he had been holding for 3 years. The executive boardroom on the top floor of Adeyemi Global Holdings looked out over the gleaming Atlantic coastline. The sprawling mahogany table, once ruled with an iron fist by Kola Adame, sat surrounded by pale, shaken board directors. The heavy double doors opened and Tunde Okoye walked in. He wore a crisp charcoal suit, carrying a leather folio. Without waiting for an invitation, he walked directly to the high-backed leather chair at the head of the table, the chairman's seat. "Gentlemen," Tunde said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority across the silent room. effective immediately. By court-ordered receivership and verified asset restitution of the 2004 Okoye Industries takeover, this board is dissolved. We are restructuring from the ground up. A portly senior director stammered, "Mr. Okoye, on what legal grounds?" Tunde slid a single federal court decree onto the center of the table. "On the grounds that the foundation of this company was built on stolen property. Meeting adjourned." High above the bustling street of Ikoye, sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse study. Amara sat alone at a sleek marble desk, dressed in an emerald green silk blouse. Before her lay her personal asset transfer filings and the final divorce settlement papers, granting her complete ownership of her independent philanthropic foundation, unattached to any corporate debt or liability. She picked up a heavy gold pen, her reflection clear in the polished glass of the window behind her. She had entered Kola's mansion years ago as a captive trophy. She was leaving the marriage as a sovereign woman. With a steady, unhesitating hand, she signed her maiden name alongside her married one for the absolute final time, severing the legal bond that had chained her to Kola's toxic empire. The heavy iron reinforced door of the visiting room clicked open. Kola Adame was led inside by two guards, his wrists free of handcuffs, but his posture profoundly defeated. He wore a plain grey detention jumpsuit instead of his usual tailored Italian suits. Amara sat across the reinforced glass partition, waiting quietly in her tailored white blazer, her expression entirely neutral. Kola rushed to the table, pressing his hands against the thick glass divider. "Amara, you have to listen to me," he pleaded, his voice cracking with raw, uncharacteristic desperation. "The lawyers are lying to me. They say everything is gone. You still have access to the private trust. Call the judge. Tell them this was a family misunderstanding." Amara looked at him through the glass. There was no anger left in her eyes, only a profound, heavy sorrow for a man who had consumed himself with his own poison. "There is no misunderstanding, Kola," Amara said softly, her voice carrying clearly through the intercom speaker. "You built a fortress out of lies, secrecy, and cruelty, and you expected everyone inside it to remain invisible. You didn't lose your empire because of me or Tunde. You lost it because you never learned how to see anyone other than yourself." As Amara stood up and walked out of the visiting room, the heavy door opened again. Tunde Okoye stepped inside, slipping his charcoal suit jacket off and hanging it over the back of the metal chair. He sat down directly across from Kola, where Amara had just been. Kola, who had slumped back into his chair in bitter silence, suddenly bolted upright. His eyes flared with venomous hatred, his teeth bared. "You!" Kola hissed, his voice trembling with suppressed fury. "You parasitic snake! You sat at my table, drank my whiskey, and played the loyal friend for 20 years while you dug my grave." Tunde leaned forward, resting his elbows on the metal table, his gaze steady and ice cold. "I played the only game you left me to play, Kola. You destroyed my father in 2004 with a pen stroke and a handshake. I simply waited until you forgot that karma keeps better ledgers than you do. The Okoye name is restored. Your accounts are empty, and you are right where you belong." The massive iron gates of the Lekki Phase 1 mansion swung wide open under the harsh morning sun, no longer welcoming VIP guests or luxury cars, but federal receivership trucks. If Williams stood on the sweeping marble driveway, holding a digital tablet and overseeing the inventory of the sprawling estate. The glowing server racks in Kola's home office had already been powered down and crated into federal evidence vans. The gold-plated fixtures, luxury art pieces, and vault keys were being catalogued one by one. For Eve, walking through these halls was no longer an exercise in terror, but a symbol of complete transformation. He was no longer the frightened, overlooked secretary hiding USB drives in his pocket. He was the chief witness and lead corporate consultant for the new administration. A federal officer walked up, handing Ife the final set of property keys. The house is fully secured, Ife. The transfer is complete. A week after the federal takeover, a bright, hopeful crowd gathered outside the newly minted Okoye Adeyemi Philanthropy Center in Victoria Island. The building, once an empty shell of one of Kola's abandoned real estate ventures, now stood freshly painted and humming with community life. Amara stood at the podium in a radiant cream and gold Ankara dress, cutting the ceremonial red ribbon alongside Tunde and Efe. The flashbulbs popping around them were no longer sensationalist tabloid cameras, but documentary crews recording a genuine societal shift. For too long, wealth in this city has been built on the backs of the silenced and the deceived, Amara announced into the microphone, her voice steady and resonant. Today, we prove that integrity is not a weakness, and that true legacy is measured by what we build together, not what we steal. Applause erupted, warm and sustained, as Tunde and Efe smiled beside her. 1 month later, the oak-paneled chamber of the Federal High Court in Lagos was packed to capacity. Journalists, legal scholars, and former business associates sat in breathless silence as the presiding judge adjusted his spectacles and looked down from the elevated bench. Kola Adame stood at the defendant's podium. Gone was the arrogant swagger, the booming voice, and the immaculate designer suits. He wore a plain, coarse prison uniform, his shoulders slumped and his face deeply lined with the toll of unmitigated defeat. Kolawole Adeyemi, the judge intoned, his voice echoing across the silent courtroom. You have been found guilty on all counts of corporate fraud, asset theft, conspiracy, and historical financial manipulation dating back to 2004. For your crimes against the state and private citizens, this court sentences you to 15 years imprisonment without the option of a fine, with all remaining assets permanently forfeited to the Federal Receivership Board. The gavel came down with a sharp final crack. The sun dipped below the horizon of the Lagos Lagoon, setting the sky ablaze in brilliant strokes of crimson, gold, and violet. The evening breeze carried the gentle hum of a city moving forward into a cleaner, more honest era. On the high rooftop terrace overlooking the vibrant skyline, Amara and Tunde stood side by side at the glass railing. The multi-year battle was over. The ghosts of 2004 had been laid to rest, and the tyrants had fallen to their own undoing. Amara turned her gaze from the horizon, looking at Tunde with a soft, genuine smile. We actually did it, Tunde. The city is breathing again. Tunde turned, smiling warmly back at her as the warm sunset light illuminated them both. We didn't just reclaim the past, Amara. We built the future. With the sparkling lights of Lagos stretching endlessly before them, they raised their glasses to the new dawn, stepping forward into a life unchained by secrets,